Angus suggested the woods whose leaves were turning red and brown, chestnut and beech and birch and alder crowding for position as they stood together between the fortress and the river. It was the day after, and Diffenwell had been attentive, walking with her around the forest, telling her all he knew about her mother, before Angus advised her to rest, and she was shown to the scriptorium beside a small chapel within the fortress's walls. Osric sat, leafing over some of the parchments bound together, such as any other scriptorium she had ever been in, except that the words were picked out in Cymric rather than English or Gaelish or Saxon. From there, Osric could see the trees, and from a story up it looked to her that they were not still, trapped in the soil, but mobile, as if they were fleeing down the hill from the outer gate of Diffenwell's palace towards the river. Indeed, some were so close to the water's edge it looked as if they were trying to make it across. It was an ancient woodland, with twisted roots and gnarled branches. And she had noticed votive offerings upon the branches, which told her the ancient practices of the Britons, heathens, as Christians would call them, were tolerated by Diffenwell. Another reason for resistance, Osric supposed, for Constantine would insist on Combesil's church being upheld with no exceptions, as Domhnall had done in Dumnotter. As the week drew on, walking the grounds, reading the manuscripts, Osric noticed a ship being readied on the Clyde River, just beneath her window. Soon they would be out of this kingdom and on the way to Highwell, and she felt a pang of pity that she had come to her mother's land under such circumstances, a sadness she shared with Diffenwell on the day before the ship was about to sail. "This is your land," Diffenwell told her, as they walked together beside the river, the single-masted boat tied up by the quay. "You never have to ask to come to visit, even if I am not here. I will have Angus know of it, so the guards know. Are you away often? I understand your southern border is Adamont, and your northern Malag." "You are very well informed," Diffenwell told her, combing back his waist-length hair back from his face. "I have been to Amont, and Cumbraland, although my father's former slave claims to be king there," he added. "Guthard," Osric replied, dully. "Guthard," Diffenwell repeated. "And it is Fortriul and as far as Malag, our lands go to Gwym, that is my northern border." However, he broke off, his upbeat manner halting as he looked around. "However?" Osric prompted, looking at him. "However, I do travel into the old Dal Riotan lands. Many of my allies live on the islands there. I have to visit them, their leaders, to offer tribute, to offer trade." The Norse, Osric knew. Iona had been regularly attacked by some of them. Diffenwell was supposed to help the Gaelish islanders protect themselves from Norse raids, but they had stood by and watched as these people, of a race they disliked, were killed or displaced. So Constantine had a second plan. "He wishes me to marry a Gaelish princess, if there is one in any of the households over in Irian," Diffenwell added. He discussed the young daughter of the Lady of the Mersons. "Elfwin?" Osric sought to clarify, as if there were more than one. "Idiot," she told herself afterwards. "Just so," Diffenwell added. "But, there is strife still in that kingdom, though the lady is a fine ruler she is surrounded by enemies, Wales, Northumbrian Elmet, and Cumbraland, even Eofic, whose leaders are being threatened with Norse again." He looked across to her. "Are you quite well?" Osric had stopped and was staring at him. She was not, but she carried on walking anyway. "Just a little dizzy, may we go back?" Diffenwell nodded, and touched her shoulder as Osric turned. "I think that it is not a bad suggestion," Osric admitted. "Are there no other princesses closer to you?" Osric meant geographically, rather than spiritually, although who was she to judge if Elfwin and Diffenwell would be a good match or not? "You were in Irian once, were you not?" he asked. "Yes," Osric nodded, and withdrew away from her scabbard with a clean schrmm which made Diffenwell laugh, a little nervously. "You know of Domhnall Uineal? The king of the Ailch?" Osric nodded. "I once met him, when I was very young. When I was taken by Angus to Dunotter. He was an exile then. I won this from him. We were at Tara, to watch the High King choosing, and Malmuir's wedding." "Ah, yes," Diffenwell nodded. "They have those very rarely these days. The Norse in Car, there is infighting which spills into civil war. I believe you must have visited Irian at a good time for the country. You got your blade from there? Diffenwyl asked. I won it from Domhnall, in a fighting competition, Osric told him, and he hated that I did. Yet, we grew to be good friends. And she realized that Diffenwyl had stopped walking. Osric stopped too, and waited for the king to say what he wanted to. Bastard Gales, Diffenwyl cursed, automatically. But, if I recall the time, then you must have known Muir's son with her first husband, he ventured. Neil. Neil. Osric exclaimed, as she recalled the young boy, dedicated to the natural world, the dirtiest child she had ever known, always playing in mud or dirt and water, kind, thoughtful, brave. Osric recalled, on the day that the Norse invaded, when she had directed Mary to take the children quietly back to the Doire palace. Then, you knew his sister, Land, Diffenwyl told her. Land. The name was not familiar and, as Diffenwyl pulled on the gate that led them between the ramparts and the palisade wall. No, wait, she changed her name to something Gaelish, as your mother changed hers to a Saxon name, Diffenwyl added, playing for time so that his brain might spit out the name. Eventually, he said, Gormlaith. I only ever met her once, and she was rather tall, thin, like my father. Really? My Aunt Land. Diffenwyl broke off when Osric gasped loudly. He looked down to her stomach, but Osric was not touching her bump. Her hand was at her mouth. Gormlaith. You knew her? Gormlaith, Osric repeated. How could she have forgotten her? Tall, thin, quiet. If talking was needed, she let Hera or Mary do it. Gormlaith was a little older than Osric and remembered them all going to the monastery, learning the while she looked after Neil and the two other princes. Eochaid's daughter? Osric asked, wondering how it was she did not know that about Gormlaith. But then she did not know a lot of things, and national feeling ran as deep between Dalriata, Pitland and Strathclyde as it did between Wessex, Mercia, East Anglia, Wales. Gormlaith was treated badly by those Gaels, Diffenwyl spat, as he showed Osric into the passage down which the kitchens were, for some food. Malmuir adopted her into their household at Doire. And she let her be bargained to the King of Munster, never asking my father, for he was a Briton, Diffenwyl continued, his voice hostile. And when she was not able to produce a child, Flansinna sold her to one of the Allied princes, until they had had enough of her. I was so angry when I knew, Diffenwyl said, holding open the kitchen door so Osric could get past. Instantly, the servants within stopped what they were doing and bowed their heads. My friends, he said to them, waiting for them to go about their duties, which seemed to Osric to be filling up the big kitchen table with food. Neil found her wandering as a beggar, and in his kindness, married her, to keep her safe, even though she was much damaged and no children can come of their union. Osric nodded. She had heard the story before but, listening to it told by her relative, and realizing she was Gormlaith's relative too, it left a deep mark in her mind. You are angry, Osric said. I am, too. I knew her. And even if I hadn't, to be treated like that when she went there for protection. You have heard the story before? Diffenwyl asked, his bright blue eyes on hers. Osric nodded. But it seemed like you needed to share it. And her cousin smiled, before pulling her to him for a moment. Eat, Diffenwyl said, placing a kindly hand on Osric's back. And please, rest. This is your last night here in my palace, and I would have you remember your kin. And Osric did rest. She slept for most of the afternoon and woke when it was dark. In the room, a chill wind had found its way, and Osric reached for her cloak. A candle had been placed in her room, and she managed to get to her feet, making towards the door. A guard had been placed by it, and when Osric opened it, he turned to her, asking her to wait while he fetched one of her men, by which he meant Eswi or Phelim Mor Angus. And it was Eswi who came, concern in his face until he saw Osric standing beside her door, waiting. There is to be a feast? Osric asked, and Eswi nodded. It is where we are all now, he told her. Diffenwyl said to bring you down if you wakened. Are you strong enough to be sociable? For a little time, Osric told him, but if we are intending to leave at dawn I should get my rest, or I will be in no fit state to help you sail." "You, help us sail?" Eswi asked. "Who is sailing?" Osrith asked. "Angus," he replied. "He has the spirit of a gale, even if he is a bastard Cymric. He will take us straight past Man to the very end of Hyrule kingdom, where we expect to find him." Osrith patted the seam where she had fixed Constantine's letter. Eswi helped Osrith down the steps to the hall of Diffenwell's palace. She had sat there, many years ago, with Eswi's brother, Tagged, Fergus, Constantine, and Domhnall, listening as Eochaid wove them promises as fast as mists in their reliability, while Griogir planned to kill them all in their beds that night. So they had fled, to Ratlin, on the way to Doiaya. No such necessity to flee, Osrith told herself, as the walls, hung with skins of wolves and a huge one of a bear, was lit with many candles. At the top of the table sat Diffenwell, who was eating one huge thigh piece, presumably from a deer, and when he saw Osrith he got up, and welcomed her with enthusiasm to the table. "Sit with Angus," he encouraged, and to one of the servants added, "Bring a plate. Bring meat." Angus, whose place seemed to have been taken by a huge man, pale hair as long as Diffenwell's, got up, but then stood still when he realized that it was his seat Angus was wanting. "For the lady," Angus said to him, in Cymric. But the man just stared back at Osrith. "For the slut," he replied, before sitting back down. "Get up," Angus demanded. "Don't you know I am the Mormor of this country? Don't you know I am Connor Mab Tudr?" he asked, as if the name should have meant something to Angus. It may have, for Osrith saw Angus's face flicker, but before he could say anything, Diffenwell stood up and looked across to them. "Connor," Diffenwell called. "Shove up, you great big hinge." But the man was not for moving, and Osrith, tired and wondering why she had decided to come at all, pointed to a settle over where Phelim was deep in conversation with Eswi. "I can sit there," she said, but was ignored as Angus stepped across to the man. Diffenwell was also standing up. The men around him, presumably his lords, were all now looking at the Mormor they resented and one of their own. "Osrith. Cousin." Diffenwell called over to her. "You may have my place, and you can tell the Lords Owain and Lugh of your time in Mercia." But it never got that far. Connor, who had stood facing Angus, had now head-butted the man so hard he had fallen onto the floor, rolling in the straw as blood ran down his face and into his long, red beard. The Cymric man made a grab for Osrith, tearing at her jerkin, but the attack had no energy to it, and served only to make Osrith stagger. "Mabtut!" Diffenwell shouted, but he rounded back onto Osrith, who was holding onto the back of the settle with her weak, left hand. "Slut!" he called again, as Angus rolled on the floor, trying to get up. "I was there when you stabbed Colleen. He was my friend, and you killed him." He made to swipe at Osrith, who managed to dart backwards in time, for she too would have been thrown to the floor. "But Griogir paid you out." He leered at her, his voice triumphant. "He liked the feel of your tits, and your cunt was very tight. How was it like to feel our man ride you? Did he tell you he got his cock in?" Osrith bit back, scornfully. "If he did, I felt nothing." Connor made to hit her again, but Osrith stepped forward, tagged seeks in her hand. It splayed at the man's stomach. "Was he your kin? How bad you must have felt to see him taken down, a traitor to both Eochaid and Domhnall." Connor made to step forward but felt the blade. "He went mad, in the end," Connor retorted, putting a hand round tagged Seek's, its blade cutting his fingers raw. The same will happen to Constantine if he had almost removed the blade from his ribs, but had not counted on Angus grabbing both of his legs, and he toppled over, onto the floor, where Angus sat on him, squarely. "Constantine's man. Come to lord it over us." Connor screamed, scrabbling at Angus, who got off him, and soundly punched him in the stomach. Grunting, Connor rolled over, but managed to turn his head to Osrith. "Is that the father of your brat? Do you even know?" "Oh, I know," Osrith shouted back, as the man was hauled away by two guards. Another appeared at her right, supporting her elbow. "He is going to the dungeons," Diffenwell said, his voice at the side of her head. But I wish to speak to you, Osrith. He turned to a maid. Bring the lady some food, we will be in my chamber. And, blithely ignoring the frantic waving of arms from Eswi, Osrith followed her cousin from the hall.